kuphi nakuphi emakhaya amadolobheni aselukomplasi lakhona sawubona ke mbukele and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Yilungelo Lakho. It's your right. Silethela ke luhlelo lapha umamba phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Siphinde sibuye na ku SABC Plus. Mina ke bekunene ngisimpiwe eNkongwane. Now, South African consumers are caught between a rock and a hard place as the cost of living continues to hike. Kukhuphuka ke kwamanani etinvo letithengiswako sekulethele ke bathengi bomadima emakhikini. Ingabe ke bathengi bangathini ngalesimo? Asasingene endzabeni yethu namhla. Begnene, it's just hours before South African consumers fork out more for energy and fuel at the pumps following the recently announced fuel levy increase. Bathengi ke basabhekene ke nekukhuphuka kwemthelo wa Petrol phecelezi i-fuel levy manje sekutomela ukuthi ke bavuke ngakusasa ekuseni babhadale imali etshisiwe.
From the 4th of June this year, the general fuel levy will increase by 16 cents per litre and 15 cents per litre of diesel.
Seso sibhengezo sakutsha nje esishiye abathengi bexhalabele ipokotho zabo.
Kusilimaza kakhulu because imali ayikhuphuka emisebenzini kodwa ngapha kukhuphuka upetrol ukudla kudure.
Kusho ukuthi silimele kakhulu ngoba kuzokhosa ukuthi nama passenger abhadale more umdlula lo.
I don't think the government also considers how much we earn.
It means that the crime rate is onyuka.
Into ehlangane ne-fuel levy kanjalo affects wonke umuntu ukuthi uhambe from esikoleni ukuthi umuntu osebenzayo nanomuntu ekliniki ama-factor ngoba ngithi manje itaxini iyakhuphuka
Unzima kakhulu angifuni uqamba amanga.
Bobo bunzima obukwabonwa ngumbutho wabathengi iPeter Maritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group. Isithethi salombutho uMervyn Abrahams ungqine wenjenje.
The fuel levy, which is an administrative levy, works very similar to a value-added tax, almost, when it is applied in the economy. What I mean by that is that a fuel levy would affect everything, almost everything that is manufactured and which is transported in South Africa, because all of those processes would involve fuel at some level of the manufacturing production level and transport. And so we are bound to see, therefore, that an increase in the fuel levy will have a corresponding increase in the input costs into the production of those goods and services. And of course, that increase, the corporate sector will just hand over, of course, to the consumer.
Oka Abrams uthi nalo madlana abanayo abathengi iphelela ezandleni umntu engekenzi nanto.
When we look at taxi fares, so two taxi fares, two return fare taxi fares, which is often used by workers, then that will arrive at about 1,680 Rand. So that is about 34% of that national minimum wage that will go just to transport. So when the fuel levy kicks in and taxi fares are increased, then it would gobble up a greater proportion than 30% of the transport cost. And workers will continue to pay that cost.
Phansi kwesisimo sinzima kubonakala ngathi kofuneka abathengi babe ngathi babhinqela phezulu. Khanyisile Lavisa, Yilungelo Lakho.
Kuthi ke bathengi bangaphila kanjani ke phansi kwalesi simo asesimukele ke lomnye wethu tetfu lesimjwayele kakhulu kulolu hlelo Gerald Mwandiyambira lo umchwephesha ke wetemnotfo samukele na Dr. Thula Mkhabela lobuya ke Agricultural Research Council lochumana nganathi ke e-studio ku Microsoft Teams. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Always a pleasure.
Dr. Mkhabela, very good afternoon to you too. Welcome. I'll touch base with you in just a moment. But Gerald, we just heard the insert. I mean, it's no secret that it's time that we rethink our lifestyle choices. And for those consumers who are living from paycheck to paycheck, what is it that they should cut back on, and what should remain a priority at this particular instance?
Look, Simpiwe, I think everybody has cut back. You know, we say tighten belt. Belt is gone. You can't even wear it.
It's gone already. It's in
gone.
pieces.
It's in pieces. There's very little we can do to keep promoting the message that we're overspending somewhere. If anything, we've pretty much reached our limit. I think our conversation must now be broader and now start incorporating how can we get extra income? Because there's no other way you can cut back. And getting extra income means, you know, what can we do? Maybe I have a little vegetable garden and I make 200, 300 Rand a month growing them. I save on my eggs. Remember, we grew up, all of us, with chickens at the back of the house.
Yes.
The chickens need to come back. You know, we need to look at ways where we can be creative to create extra income. But realistically, for the average South African to still tell them right now to cut back, it's almost condescending, because people have cut back to the extent where people have almost stopped living. People are no longer enjoying the same standard of life as they were before. And we were cushioned through after COVID because most people were working from home. So that extra transport cost, we didn't get to experience it. We used it for groceries, for electricity, but now people are being forced back to work, and that's why you're suddenly seeing everyone is now saying, yo, it's hard, because we are having to absorb this extra cost of transport as well as electricity.
In as much as you're suggesting that we should start making other means of income, but there's always that D word that will linger, debt, the debt burden. How do consumers, you know, get away from debt?
When things are hard, you can't get away from debt. When things are hard, you actually sometimes have to survive on managing debt. So debt has its place in your financial economy, personal economy. However, if you can manage it, I think that's the way most people are surviving. But we need to start saying, let's move away from debt reliance to try and create additional income, and perhaps, you know, go back to almost that whole Stokvel model. It's July Savings Month, where, you know, the burial society was men coming together. Our mama come to Stokvel. We need to come up with ways in which we help each other and carry each other, because we've reached a point where communities are literally falling apart because poverty levels are increasing.
Indeed, indeed. Dr. Mkabela, let me also bring you in, and thank you so much for joining us. First of all, let's talk about if you levy. If you levy, and I know that there's some consumers who may argue that they don't have cars, so it does not affect them in any way. But the truth of the matter is, it does indirectly affect them. Let's talk about why they should care about this fuel levy increase, and you know, what is it that they should consider in terms of cushioning themselves against such.
Thank you very much, Simpiwe, and good afternoon to the listeners. Maybe let me start by correcting the fact that I'm not from the Agricultural Research Council. I'm from a small advisory company that we run called Outcome Mapping, and I'm also affiliated with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the Center for Food, African Center for Food Security.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you so much for clarifying that, and we do apologize for that.
No, that's fine. And just to get straight to the point, fuel levy is, it will be a myth to actually say we shouldn't worry about it, especially even people who don't have cars, because it affects everybody. Like the previous speaker has just said, that fuel levy has ripple effect, or fuel costs have ripple effect throughout the economy. So what happens is that most people get to work using transportation, whether you drive your own car, whether it's public transport. Somehow you will feel the pinch of the increased fuel levy, because what it does, it increases the cost per liter of fuel, whether it's petrol or diesel. So hence, all of us as consumers need to be concerned about it, because it will translate into affecting our day-to-day living, especially coming to issues of food and food security, where it will then increase the cost of food production, because fuel in agriculture is a major input or cost driver for agricultural production, where it accounts for between 11 and 15%, depending on the enterprise that you are doing. That ends up being transmitted to the consumer.
You know, Dr. Mkabela, I know that when the VAT reversal was announced, you know, because of political tensions, as it were, you know, so many consumers celebrated. But that celebration was short-lived with the announcement of a fuel levy. What should we read into that? Was it possibly a trade-off?
Maybe let's start by saying that we are dealing with a government that finds itself hard-pressed in terms of revenues. jobs have not been growing in South Africa. Not everybody works, and a number of people are below the tax bracket where people are taxed, and a huge population or a proportion of our population is dependent on grants, which by extension means they do not pay pay as you earn in terms of taxes. So this rejection of the VAT put the government between a rock and a hard place, because they still need to collect revenues one way or the other. So when this avenue was shut, they had to look for something else. But I must say that the increasing fuel levy is not very different from actually going the VAT route, because a fuel levy is a regressive policy move, which with widespread inflationary consequences, especially for food, like I've just said, because it puts a lot of people under pressure, especially given a food system that's already under pressure from climate change, from infrastructure decay, and also from other rising input costs. So this burden will be disproportionately borne by the smallholder farmers, rural consumers, and the urban poor. So this issue of VAT and having us breathing a sigh of relief that VAT government could not increase it, I think it has come back to bite us in the sense that the fuel levy, to me, is very similar to increasing VAT.
All right, Dr. Mkabela, please stay on the line. We'll touch base with you a little later on. Thank you so much for making that point. Now, Gerald, we often hear financial advisors speak of the 50-30-20 rule, which essentially means 50% of your income goes to necessities, 30% goes to wants and possibly needs, 20% goes to savings. Now, in a world where minimum wage in South Africa is around 5,000 rand, so how do consumers then, realistically manage where transport eats up a third of their income?
It's very difficult. I mean, you said 5,000 rand, and you're asking me to save 1,000 rand a month, which means I have to live off 4,000. And it's very difficult. Most people are spending between 1.5 and 2,000 rand just on transport. And then you bring in the food. So I think we're in that situation where adjusting lifestyle is now not even an option. We need to adjust lifestyle to the point where I say, how big is your family? And you say, how big is yours, Gerald? Okay, let's share one house. We need to adjust lifestyles with critical thinking now it's no longer about me in my own house. Absolutely. It's about saying, let me call my brother, let me call my sister and say, look, can we share a house for a while and share expenses? Because on my own, I am no longer coping. And most people are simply not coping anymore on the minimum wage. And I think, it's one of those challenges for government. As you said, VAT possibly was even better than the fuel levy, because the fuel levy touches everything. Nothing can escape the fuel levy. Whereas with VAT, there's certain things which don't attract VAT. Brown bread doesn't attract VAT. Certain foodstuffs, tomatoes, don't attract VAT. So if you're living in an environment where you're just surviving, you are not going to be paying VAT. But because they went for the fuel levy, everything relies on fuel. So even, that bread which is VAT-free, or even those foodstuffs which are VAT-free, they are not fuel-free.
Absolutely. Well, great point you made there. Let's leave it there for now, Mbogeli. Let's take a pause for now, shall we? And we'll be right back. This is Your Right. Yilungelo Lakho. We'll be right back. Sakumola futhi mbukela icingo teve setivuliwe ukuthi nawe ke ngaba ingcenye enkulumo yethu namhla ungashayela icingo khona manje la e-studio ku 011 714 0671 noma ke 011 714 0672 ungasithumela futhi na WhatsApp ku 060 844 9857. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za noma ke usithinze enkundleni yethu yokuxhumana kubo Facebook. Namhla ke sina Dr. Mkabela is speaking to us via Zoom. Dr. Mkabela, we just heard my other guest in studio saying that if VAT was actually much better, because there are some, food products or food items that cannot be taxed. But if you're a levy or nage, it's much worse because it cuts across the board. So maybe in simple terms, how does this fuel level trickle down to basic necessities like transport, food, and household goods?
No, thank you for that question. Yeah, I tend to agree with my colleague in studio that the fuel levy is more far-reaching than even VAT, in the sense that most of the things that we do are, let me use food for example. There are inputs that are used in order to produce the food that ends up on our table. Be it the fuel for transporting the goods, the inputs to the farm, and also transporting the output to the market. But also during the process of producing the food itself, there's mechanization. You've got tractors that use the diesel. You've got trucks, refrigerated trucks that use fuel. So it fits into everything. And then for the normal working person who's not even involved in food production, there's transport cost where you have to go to and for work. You have to take your kids to school. That also translates into fuel. So he is correct in saying that the fuel levy affects everything that we do, especially everything that we pay for, because in one way or the other, it must have been moved from one place to another place, and it was produced. Remember that even things that use electricity as energy for production, in most cases, our electricity also uses diesel when there are issues where they need to use diesel. So that cost also factors in. So in a nutshell, it affects everything that we do on a daily basis.
Now, Dr. Mkabela, from where you're sitting, is there a real financial relief for us consumers, or should we brace ourselves for more financial pressure?
The short answer is there's no financial relief for us as consumers. We really need to brace ourselves for hard times to come. But I don't know how you actually brace yourself up when incomes for people have been declining in terms of salaries not keeping up with the cost of living, and a lot of people being unemployed, and a substantial number of the population being dependent on social grants and other social welfare and social networks that the states provide. So in short, I cannot see financial relief in the near future coming very soon to us.
Gerald, what are your thoughts on this? Do you have any real financial, even if we can start our own businesses and have extra sources of income, but I would imagine there'll also be some sort of financial pressures of some sorts, even when we have other businesses. But do we really have a financial relief, or should we brace ourselves for more financial pressures?
I think we can expect it to get worse before it gets better, but remember, we're a resilient society, and I think, as the doctor said, we are dependent more on social systems which are provided by government. The way around it now is we need to start forming our own social systems and social networks to support each other. We need to go back to the Stokvel. We need to start doing those cooperatives and ways in which your money and my money can combine to help us both to survive. On that 50, 30, 20 model, there's no more 20. 20 is gone.
It's gone already.
People are surviving and literally just getting by. So I think we need to be creative, to go back to basics in terms of understanding the African Commonwealth system. The African Commonwealth system meant that we all stayed together and we all shared what we had. And I think we need to take a step back in terms of even how we view our family structures to help each other to survive through this period. As the doc said, people are suffering at the first point of suffering, which is your stomach. So as times get hard, you're going to see problems such as malnutrition. You're going to see people struggling just to get a meal in a day. And I think those are already symptoms in societies and in communities where you can see the children rely on food which is provided at school. And if there's no school, they don't eat. And we need to start saying, how can we come together, as men, to say, how can my family and your family work together to get through this period? But as the doctor said, food is going to be the first point of pain. And already we also have climate change affecting food. So, we're literally going back to a time where we don't remember South Africa ever having food shortages or people being hungry. But we are now going to that time where people realistically are hungry. Where we used to go and say Mohodu Mande, because it's a treat, because you don't eat Mohodu every day. but now it's Mohodu daily, you're going for the chicken and matumbu with chicken.
It's now becoming a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. I've changed the lifestyle. What is this chicken? What is this lamb? What is this beef? No, give me scopo, give me anything which is cheaper. So already we've changed our lifestyle in that we've changed our diet. And that's all those are signs which are pointing toward a more acute problem in the future if the government doesn't arrest it. Because, you know, we're moving down in terms of the protein chain of the protein we used to consume versus the proteins we're consuming now.
Yes.
And it goes hand in hand with the starches. You know, where people were buying the bread in the plastic, now they're just buying the state government loaf from the supermarket. And we need to have leadership which says, how can we make the most of what we have? And I think it's about saying, Simpiwe, you and I, let's sit down after this. What can we do on the side to survive? The ladies doing the same thing, and government being tolerant to a people which is getting hungrier and hungrier.
In as much as it has become a cliche, but belt tightening is a term so frequently used by finance ministers. Each and every finance minister in his or her budget speech uses belt tightening. Economists, financial independent and advisors like yourselves use belt tightening. In as much as the belt is now shredded. What does belt tightening mean for a low-earning income family of 5, for instance?
For a low-income family, belt tightening means buying 1 loaf of bread less, 1 tray of eggs less. You know, belt tightening for a low-income family means, you know, instead of having meat every day, now we're buying fat and we're eating with veggies and we're now eating meat at weekends. That's belt tightening for low income. For the people who normally speak in the suits, in the hotels, belt tightening for them means, oh, I'm not buying that brand of coffee. I'm going to buy a different type of brand of coffee. Or I'm going to buy generic goods from the supermarket, not branded. But if you're in a low income environment, I'm already consuming generic goods. So if you tell me to tighten my belt, it simply means eat less of what I'm accustomed to. And I think, you know, the whole term is now almost condescending on those who are simply surviving. And it's a good thing we're getting a bit of relief in things like the trains coming back. But the trains run on diesel. So, you know, that was the best, the better of the two evils. But we didn't know government had another plan in mind. But in hindsight, if South Africa was made to choose between that VAT increase and fuel levy, you'll find that most people would have gone for the VAT. But obviously we were blindsided. Government needs to be more efficient. As much as government says they need the tax revenue to support grants, etc., there's too much inefficiency in government and wastage where we need to start realizing that, you know, we need to work together. The same way we are saving at home, government needs to start doing at home as well.
So basically, efficiency should start from the top before it trickles down to the citizenry. Let's leave with the fun. Please to join us after this commercial break. We'll be right back. Yilungelo Lakho. Welcome back, everybody. Now, kumbula ukuthi mbukele tingo solo tivuliwe ukuthi nawe ngaba ingcenye yale nkulumo namhla ukuvakalisa umbono wakho. You can call up participation lines right now. They are on your screens. 011-714-0671 noma ke 011-714-0672. You can also send us a WhatsApp to 060-844-9857. Ungasithumela futhi ne-email ku-consumer@sabc.co.za noma ke usithinze ke ku-Facebook. Let's now cross back to our guest on Teams, Dr. Mkhabela. Now, Dr. Mkhabela, in as much as some consumers may think that eating cheaper foods, say for instance, no disrespect, like emagwinya or fat cakes would be the cheaper option, but then not realizing that it's actually more costlier because the cost of that will come back a little later to bite them in the case of medical bills, isn't it?
Yes, you're correct. When we talk about food security, we're not just talking about the amount of food that a person consumes, but we're also talking about the nutrition security, the quality of what you get from the food that you eat. And the point that you've raised is very important, especially for ingane sakula, which in the first 1,000 days, science tells us that you need to eat a proper and balanced diet in order to grow up and be a fully functional, economically active adult later on in life. So the fact that you think you are saving money by eating less nutritive food is just a coping mechanism, and it can only last for a short while as people are finding means to cope and survive. But maybe to get back to that point again, even that which you consider to be low quality and cheap food will also go up, because remember, this is produced using fuel. and whosoever is selling and making the flour will now make it more expensive. So even those magwinya that you used to buy at a particular price, very soon the price will almost double or even more. So we're really caught between a rock and a hard place here.
So whatever the reason that made the rat to jump from the frying pan into the fire must be hotter than the fire itself, isn't it?
Yeah, true. It's very difficult to know where to run to.
Now, from your perspective, Dr. Mkhabela, do you think the fuel levy increase was economically viable, or was there other means perhaps of filling up the budget gap?
I think, to be fair to the policymakers, one wants to believe that they might have applied their mind to a number of options that were on the table.
Yeah.
But like I said in my opening statement, that a government also needs to collect revenue in order to support the services or service delivery, as it were. And I think fuel levy was more of a reactionary approach from the policymakers at the time, when they realized that they could not really go the VAT route. Yeah. I think there are other ways that a government could actually look at raising revenues, looking at more progressive tax alternatives, like what people call wealth taxes, where you look at corporate windfall levies, where you tax the super profits that happen every now and then in big corporate companies, and also tightening the base erosion and profit shifting loopholes, which is what Gerald was talking about, to say that the state or government is very inefficient. Yes, they need more money, they need to grow the tax base, but if we were to improve the efficiency of how things are done at government level, there will be more money that's available to do the basic needs that government needs to take care of.
And how does this play an influence in terms of the impact of inflation beyond what we pay at the pumps?
Yeah, definitely the fuel levy is inflationary in its nature. What it will do, it will then have a trickle effect that will cause increased inflation, which we might very soon be looking at an interest rate hike from the South African Reserve Bank if things continue the way that they are. Because what happens is that everybody tries to pass on the additional cost of production to the next person in the value chain, and it ends up with the consumers, for those that can actually, where the price transmission is quite visible and possible. But unfortunately for farmers, especially small-scale farmers, they are unable to actually pass the cost to the consumer, because they live on very small profit margins, and if they increase their prices too much, then they cut themselves out of the competition. And remember, they are also often far-flung in terms of location in deep rural areas, which means they need transport to actually move the goods to the marketplace and also to bring in the inputs. So for the food sector, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay. Now, Gerald, we've seen during COVID-19, some credit providers extending payment holidays, so to speak. And in this particular instance, would you advise consumers to take advantage of such payment holidays? What are the pros and the cons?
Look, I would say if you're sitting and you're trying to balance your finances, you need to look at all the options that are available. So debt is part of your personal economy. Debt is not evil if you can manage it. We need to look at things like debt consolidation. Yeah. It's also another way in which you can try and almost, release some extra income every month by consolidating your debt, but you need to be in good standing. And we need to just realize...
But some other sentiments are to the effect that debt consolidation is more crippling.
Well, debt consolidation is a temporary measure. Remember, sometimes you take a step back to move forward, but if it's part of a plan and it's the only way you can release some income in your home, it is definitely one of the options that's available. But the biggest challenge right now is that most people don't have income. Because income is the mechanism which allows you at least to maneuver and pay off debt and get around it. So right now we have a situation where how do we survive? Yeah. And I think that is the question every consumer is simply trying to answer, to say, how do I move from paycheck to paycheck? Remember a year or two ago, there was a research which came out which said that consumers ran out of money after 5 days from payday.
Sure, tell me about it.
And 5 days, we were thinking that's hectic. Now, for some people, payday is just a day, literally.
No difference.
And no difference, and you move on to the next day, and you just need to survive. And all these things are going to have a negative effect. Doc spoke about the quality and nutritional value of the food we consume. We're moving more towards processed food. We're moving more towards sugar.
Yes.
That's how we survive. When human beings don't have food, they end up consuming sugar. And sugar is actually the #1 enemy to the human body, which means that we are going to also end up with more health issues. Already diabetes is an issue. And all those illnesses, even cancer, has been, to some research, linked to sugar consumption. So because of our nutrition deficient diet, we're moving towards more sugary or processed products, which, you know, you think you're eating meat, but they actually put sugar in that meat. Eating sugar. And that's really the reality of where most of us are sitting right now. And I think, you know, the tough conversation now is around saying, if you're not in a stokvel, what are you doing?
What are you doing with your life? Yeah.
What are you doing with your life?
Now, back to the analogy of, you know, the rat that jumped from the frying pan into the fire. I mean, we touched earlier on payment holidays and debt consolidation, but holistically speaking, do you not think it elongates the repayment period and you end up paying even more because of that elongation?
Look, the reason why people accept increased loan terms and payment holidays is because everyone is hopeful. Tomorrow is a brighter day. Tomorrow I'll get another opportunity. Tomorrow I might get a new job.
Yes.
That's why I'd rather extend it to the future than opposed to dying now. So yes, it's the rat that jumped from the pot into the fire, into the mouth of the cat. But I'm believing that whilst I'm in the mouth of the cat is old and doesn't have teeth.
Let's leave it there for now. Please don't go away. We are back after this break. So, the numbers on your screens right now, 011-714-0671 and 011-714-0672. These are participation lines. You must again WhatsApp 060-844-9857 or email your views to consumer@sabc.co.za or alternatively like our Facebook page. And we're not getting calls today. I'm not sure whether the topic is heavy or viewers are just, nonchalant about what we're discussing, but it's a very, very important discussion that cuts across the board. Everyone is affected by this fuel levy. Now, Dr. Mkabela, do you think this fuel levy affects the low-income earners or the higher-income earners, the owners of vehicles, or it just cuts across the board?
It cuts across the board, but it affects the poor and low-income earners disproportionately more than others. Okay. Like Gerald was trying to illustrate the fact that when you talk about belt tightening, it means different things to different people in terms of your income bracket where you are. So for the low-income people, they depend directly on paying from their pocket for transportation, for example, and they don't have an option of having 2 days working from home and using the Teams and the Zoom things that we're using right now. Yeah. They really have to show up to work, whether it's an empty stomach or not, and they still have to pay for the transportation. We know that there are cases where people pay more than 50% of their income on transportation. In fact, we are told that over 70% of South Africa's food is transported by road, which increases that. But also the people that are low-income earners spend a lot of their money on transportation and on food. So this fuel levy will affect the for lack of a better word, the poor even more compared to the well-off sectors of society.
Now, without digressing, I know that, the next question will probably, trigger other questions with regards to economic inequality in South Africa. Do you think this will inadvertently affect economic inequality, or are we just widening the gap even further?
Yeah, this will definitely not assist in bridging the income inequality that we have in South Africa. It will make it even worse in terms of, like we've just explained, that it will affect the poor disproportionately more than those who are high-income earners and well-off people. So that would mean that the poor will get poorer, and in some cases you may find that those who are well-off right now will benefit also from this because they've learned how to position themselves and exploit situations that may be dire in terms of those that are are struggling to keep the wolf from the door.
Now, Gerald, suffices to mention that we've tried almost everything. We've tried Forex, we've tried Bitcoin to survive. Triple M. We've
been there.
Yeah, we've been there, we've done it all. Yeah. But nothing seems to work. What about community saving initiatives like Stokvels? Are they still relevant?
I think Stokvels are more relevant than ever now. I think the main thing we need to do is to modernize how Stokvels are run and have set goals. I do some advice to Stokvels, and many Stokvels I find don't have goals. Any investment needs to have a term. At the end of that term, a goal is achieved, and then you reassess whether to reinvest. So typically a Stokvel, we should be saving towards a goal, like saying this year we're saving 100,000. When we've saved 100,000, we either dissolve it and pay out everyone, or we move to the next level. But we can't save into perpetuity, because life happens, I lose my job, and it messes things up. So we need to just structure the Stokvels better. We need to go into our own abilities, because also don't join a Stokvel for 2,000 Rand when you know all you're waiting is for your round. And then after your round, you've lost your job. No, it doesn't work. Go for something small. Let's start rebuilding those structures. But in answer to your question, this is the time of the Stokvel to return. This is the time of the men's society to put their heads up and lead. Because right now, we need men who are now going to take leadership, especially when it comes to running homes and income. One of the reasons we end up having GBV, etc., is because men are abdicating accountability in terms of providing. So we need to come back and be men, provide for our wives, provide for our families, provide for our children. And we need that urgently, because right now we're in that space where the doc was saying the gap between rich and poor is widening in the country with the widest gap between rich and poor. It won't have a happy ending if no urgent interventions are taken. You know, things that the government is doing, fuel levy, VAT increase, is for the government. But ultimately, government serves the people. If people are finding that 350 grant is no longer getting what I was getting 2 years ago, it either becomes a 550 or a 600 grant, or else people are going to start saying, you know what, we need something to change.
Do you not think it's time now that employers need to come to the party in terms of assisting employees, you know, to cushion them against these adverse effects of, you know, increases? Say, for instance, allowing the employees to work from home to serve on quite a number of things like transport, fuel, and even lunch. You know, one thing that we find ourselves paying more for is lunch at work, when I can save by eating at home.
So the challenge for the employers is definitely there. But the problem is that, as the doctor was saying, the lowest earning worker, the machine is at the factory. So a machine cannot come to your house and you start working in the factory at home. You know, this working from home thing is for people with computers and fiber and internet. It's the middle class and the upper class who probably are less impacted by the fuel levy. But the person who's impacted by the fuel levy is the domestic worker. I need to go there. I can't say, ma'am, I'm going to work from home. I'll wash the clothes at my house. No. You need to show up at work. It's the petrol attendant. You need to put petrol at the garage. You can't say, let's do hosepipe to my house and we make a plan. So to me, that's the biggest challenge. That, as you're saying, employers must intervene. So the only way employers can intervene is pay people more. Pay people more. And I think that's where you know, the doc was also going to say that there are cleverer ways to tax, you know, super profits, looking at corporate profitability and encouraging or even legislating that companies start giving back more. So as much as big corporates have huge budgets for something like CSI, they can introduce social benevolent funds for employees, etc., to work hand in hand with pension funds. And government did try, you know, the two-pot system. We've already forgotten about it because everyone ate their pot. You know, but that was a way in which government tried to release money back into the system, but it looks like we need it again.
All right, let's take our first caller. We've got Anonymous. Very good afternoon to you, Anonymous. Welcome. Anonymous, good afternoon and welcome. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome.
Hello?
Good afternoon, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Yilungelo.
Okay, siyabonga kakhulu ukusishayela babe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay. Sorry about.
Khuluma nami baba. What's on your mind?
Yes. Njengoba kuyekutshela in South Africa, baye bathi akhona ama-reserves akhona for the time being. Ibitheni singasebenzisi wona, bavele bathi njena ngisho nake jointing akuvele kukhona kuthiwa kwenye ubhiya u-SABC kuvele kwenye ubhiya there and there. Why? Kanti akho ndlela bangaphushina ngayo for time being.
All right, Anonymous, thank you so much for your call. We'll definitely address it shortly after this break. Asibambe lapho ke mbukeli sibuyela ngisethitolo hlala kanye nathi ungasanyakadi siyabuya. Leli Ilungelo Lakho. Don't go away. Welcome back to our very final segment. Now, gentlemen, just before we wrap the show, we had a caller from Anonymous who's basically asking, was there any other way of, not implementing the fuel levy? Because it affects everybody, including the unemployed. And I'm going to pose this question to you, Dr. Mkabela. What's your thoughts on it?
I couldn't agree with the caller more because it does affect everybody, even the unemployed. One wish is that we could have gone a different route in terms of looking for an avenue to get the revenue for government. But like I said earlier on, that I don't think this was taken lightly. I think the government had run out of ideas at the time of what it had to do in terms of that. Because remember, the budget that had been rejected before, and it was now becoming a near crisis that the country will run without a government, which would have meant that services would have come to a standstill. But I think now it gives us a chance as South African society to relook at how we do this, because this decision that was taken by the government should not be cast in stone. Having heard all the sides and looked at it properly in terms of the effect that it will have economy-wide, I think policymakers need to go back to the drawing board and consult even wider to say what other options are there, and be transparent about the way they go about doing the budgeting process so that people can actually have inputs in terms of how do we deal with this.
And still on the subject of affecting the poorest of the poor, earlier on I asked Gerald whether employers, shouldn't they come to the party in terms of, advancing or extending the option of working from home? And Gerald said that, well, that might benefit the middle class, but then the low-income earners might not benefit at all. So what's your thoughts on this? Employees, or rather employers, telling the employees or allowing the employees to work from home just to cut on costs?
No, I think it's a case-by-case basis. You can't have a blanket approach to it. Like Gerald said, and I agree, that certain jobs cannot be done from home just by their very nature of what they are. And also, it's not every employee that actually works diligently away from the office. There are studies that have shown that certain job categories suffered a lot during COVID and during the work from home because people were really not putting in the amount of hours and mental fortitude that is required to actually make sure that the companies are productive. And secondly, we must also remember that a number of people are employed by small and medium scale companies that are also battling just to stay afloat. It's not every employer that has the wherewithal to actually make sure that they support their workers better. They are also struggling to survive, some of them.
Gerald, it seems like the poorest of poor are the most affected.
Look, the poorest of the poor and the unemployed.
And the unemployed
definitely are most affected by the fuel levy. But as Dr. Mkabela was saying, that we need to try and find ways which are smarter. And I think government has to really relook the entire ecosystem in terms of their own efficiency and in terms of SARS' ability to collect taxes. Because one of the drives which SARS is on now is to collect outstanding taxes. There's billions upon billions in uncollected taxes, and the thing about fuel levy and VAT, the government likes it because it's a real-time tax. It collects on the spot live.
Oh, yes.
There's no debt. So we need to look at ways of efficiently collecting outstanding taxes from citizens and corporates which owe the government, and we just need to create employment. I think the only way South Africa can get out of where we are going is by creating more employment, and that's where we need to say, how can we empower South Africans to create new wealth? And if we do that, I think that is the way we will start to improve the situation. But in terms of, can we tighten belts? No, the belt, I sold it. I can't tighten the belt, I sold it to eat last week. You know, or maybe I ate the leather because it tasted a bit like biltong, you know. That's the reality. But what we need to do is to remain positive. And I think as a resilient country, I'll always say, I'm positive. I believe we'll make a way, bring back the Stokvels, bring back the savings groups, and bring back Ubuntu. Us coming together as men and leading, us coming together as society with solutions which are best for South Africa and not best for any particular group.
And as we wrap the show, what's your words of advice to a consumer who's trying so hard to stretch his salary and trying so hard not to get into debt?
Look, I would say, you know, the biggest expense next to transport is food. So let's eat less. Unfortunately, next to transport, food and is the next biggest expense. Energy and transport we really can't run away from. So maybe let's, as we started, let's really look at our lifestyle choices, and hopefully we can find some middle ground and savings in there, because that's where most people can only cut on food.
All right.
Everything else, they're pretty much tied.
All right. Gerald and Dr. Mkabela, great chatting to you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Kwanye lombukelele sesifike emaphethelweni enhlelo lethu fike namhla ngicela ngibonge ivakashi tethu ngesikhathi sabo ngithaza bonga kanye nani babukele ngeba nathi kuze kube manje asihlangane futhi ke evikini elitako lapho sitabe sinethela ke lenye indzaba letawutsinza wena nemalungelo akho njengemthengi. From me Simphiwe Ngongwane and the rest of the team sisike nisale kahle and do have a great week ahead. Cheers.
Yilungelo Lakho.